Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. I got a comment from Sue Lee. She says, I just found the YouTube video of the vision of the Third World War of George Albert Smith. In which of your videos can I find you're talking about this? I need to see your take on it. Crying face. Okay, thank you, Sue, for your comment. I went ahead and looked this up. So you can find this in a couple different places. There's this, what I think is a blog, nofearpreps.com. There's also ldsawake.com, and they talk about it on ldsfreedomforum.com, and there may be others. And typically I don't like to go off of just websites like this. I like to go to the primary source and see for myself that this is real, that it's legitimate. And it does seem to exist. If you go to BYU's website, they make note of it, but they don't have it accessible online. So this is BYU Library Special Collections, David Hughes Horne, Recollection of a Vision by George Albert Smith. And as far as I know, I mean, I may have to look into this more, or if any of you have additional information about this, please send it my way. But as far as I know, this is the single source of this supposed prophecy, and I don't think that it's real, or if it is, I think it's misremembered. But let's get into it. So, okay, scope and contents note. So there is some information on here, even though we don't have the actual document that we can view. Collection contains a typescript account of a vision of George Albert Smith, which he related to David Hughes Horne when Horne was a young boy. So already not looking too good, because he, retold this when he was an adult. So I don't know, maybe he has a really good memory, but that's already a little bit of a red flag. The 4-page long document is dated December 6th, 1988, and is printed in Horne's business letterhead. Okay, and who is he? David Hughes Horne, born about 1935, was a member of the United States Air Force, was an NACE corrosion specialist and aerospace engineer at Hill Air Force Base. It was able to patent his invention of a process for increasing strength, flexibility, and fatigue life of metals. Horne is a descendant of Asel Smith through Asel's son John, an uncle of the prophet Joseph Smith. President George Albert Smith was David H. Horne's paternal grandmother's first cousin. From 1944 to 1947, Horne's family lived near George Albert Smith and therefore had frequent contact with him. So he's like a distant relative, but they are related and they had contact. So, and this was told to him when he was a boy. Okay, so I wish I could see the actual typescript, but we're just going to have to go off of what's recorded here on these blogs. I did notice just one example at the very bottom. It ends by saying, Sister Richards told him about the vision too, but this one on LDS Awake, it ends, and Sister Richards told him about the vision as well. So I don't know which account is the most accurate one, like which one was copied down like word for word, but I'm noticing a discrepancy between these two accounts, but I can't really speak to that, but just be aware of that. But we'll just go ahead and just arbitrarily read the one on here from nofearpreps.com. And here we go. Okay. David Hughes Horne, PE, chemical engineer, 28th of February, 1989. Sometimes rare, traumatic, and shocking events become emblazoned into one's memory. This paper documents such an event. In 1946, I witnessed a prophetic utterance made by George Albert Smith. You know what? Okay, so this is 1946, and it said that he was born in 1935. So he was 11 years old. Okay? 11 years old. So try and think back to when you were 11 years old and how much detail you recall from that period of your life. Okay. I witnessed a prophetic utterance made by George Albert Smith, the prophet and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, from 1945 to 1941. I'm a son of Dr. Lyman Merrill Horne and Merrill Swainson Horne. My father was a grandson. Okay, wait. My father was a great-grandson of George A. Smith. That's different from George Albert Smith. There was a George A. Smith, cousin of the prophet Joseph and counselor to Brigham Young. His grandson, President George Albert Smith, was Dad's mother's first cousin. From 1944 until March 1947, we lived on the same block in the Yale ward as George Albert Smith and frequently had contact with him. Many times he paused at our home while on his evening walk and talked with me as I worked in our front yard. My family visited him a few times at his home, and he visited my family at our home several times. He always showed pleasure when I met him and once told me what work the Lord had for me to do and what I must do to prepare to do his work. One day, our father arranged for George Albert Smith to speak to us in a family time. The prophet told us of a vision he had had, at least 11 elements of which have occurred. Okay, so according to him, some of this has already happened, and the rest may occur soon. My record of this prophecy may be important because it may not be officially recorded. And well, that's a problem. That's a problem because we can't necessarily accept this as revelation for the church if it hasn't been given out to the church. Like for example, in the Book of Mormon, we read of how there was prophecy that was received, but it wasn't supposed to come forth until a certain time, but it was for the entire church, and it came through authorized channels, right? It wasn't just like somebody who happened to write down a private, prophecy that was seen, and then later it's binding on the church. So I'm not saying that this didn't happen, but there's so many, I guess, red flags or things that we really need to pay attention to, rather than just like accepting this as 100% doctrine. It is going to happen. Even the author himself says may occur soon. Last year, I visited the church historian's library to read President Smith's journal to see what he had written about it, but the staff knew nothing about it. Well, I then discussed it with Leonard Arrington, former church historian. And you guys, I know about the controversy here. I'm not going to comment on it, but I am aware. Who said, I have never heard of it. Even Arthur Haycock, his faithful secretary, did not know of it, but he did not work with President Smith until July 1947. Okay, so it wasn't in his journal, and all these people that may have known about it did not know about it. We dressed up in our best clothes. I shined my shoes again and again. Our father was disappointed with his sister who went to a movie with her boyfriend. David asked her to stay with her beau. Is that what that is? Beau? Or is it boo? Isn't this like a word that's like come back, or like people call their boyfriend or girlfriend boo? I can't stand that. Dad asked her to stay with her, I think, boo, who had finished his Navy service in August 1946 and share the evening with the Lord's prophet, but she would not. We were seated at the given time in the living room, ready for the prophet to arrive. Present were my father, mother, sister, Alice Merrill Horne, the second, age 17, my brother, Robert H. Horne, 14, my twin, Jonathan H. Horne, and I, 11. Oh, okay, he says his age here. Sorry, I haven't read this whole thing. I'm just reading it raw. It was after dark, and we had difficulty making the front porch light work. It was cold in that room, and I was glad to wear a coat. Thus, I think his visit was between October 1946 and January 1947. Okay, so a lot of uncertainty going on here. Thereafter, we were preparing to move. President Smith said much more than what I remember exactly, but some of his statements were so impressive that I have a brilliant recollection of them. When George Albert arrived, we sang a verse of "We Thank Thee, O God, for a Prophet." He stood and talked without notes for some time about the importance of keeping the commandments, always giving a full tithe, and being a good example wherever we are. He told us he once was on a train in Mexico with no other Northern European descendant individuals. He said that a man recognized him as a leader of the quote-unquote Mormon church and introduced himself as a Mexican government official. President Smith noted how embarrassed he and the church would have been had he not been acting as a faithful servant of the Lord should. I also heard him tell that story in another talk. Then President Smith said, quote, I have had a troublesome vision of another great and terrible war that made the war just ended look like a training exercise, and people died like flies. Just really quick, of course, he's talking about World War II that had just ended. And so, according to this supposed vision, World War II would have looked just like a training exercise. All right, continuing. It began at a time when the Soviet Union's military might dwarfed that of the United States. And we, that is the United States, would have missiles that carried an atomic bomb in Europe. I saw the United States withdraw its missiles to appease the Soviet Union, and then the war began. End quote. Let me just take a moment here and point out the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it'll come back. I highly doubt that. You could say, well, in his vision, it's like he's just using the terminology of his day. Like at that time, Russia and all the countries associated with it that were in this union were the Soviet Union. But so he's using the terminology of his day, but what he really means, he's seeing 2024 or the 2030s, and it's actually Russia and whatever Russia looks like at that time. So maybe that's what's happening. And I don't know. I guess that could be true, but if he's having like a detailed vision, he may also say this was after the Soviet Union had fallen, but Russia was still a powerful country, and its military dwarfed the United States. Now, given what we're seeing right now in 2024 and for the last couple of years, I'm not really concerned about what Russia can do, except for maybe in terms of its nuclear capabilities. But in terms of like dwarfing the military of the United States, I don't think so. And I'm not really worried about the Soviet Union or Russia invading the United States or anything like that. There could be another world war. I think that may even be likely that there's going to be a third world war. But the Soviet Union or Russia's military dwarfing the United States, I feel like that's unlikely. I guess it could happen. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Okay. He also said that we would have big missiles in deep holes he described like grain silos, which the Soviets would try to destroy by their own missiles. They would hit military installations in some cities also. He said that the president at the time would be of Greek extraction, so like a Greek, like Greek ancestry, I guess. Okay. Until then, all the presidents would be of British or Northern European ancestry. And that may be true. I'm thinking about Barack Obama. I know that his mom was white. I don't know her ancestry. If you know more about this, let me know. Is this the case? Have all presidents been of British or Northern European ancestry? Let me know if you know. He continued that the U.S. would be bound by numerous entangling alliances and would take away weapons owned by the people. He talked about the initial attack and the ground warfare, but I can't remember enough to document all their tactics and in which countries various things occurred. Okay, so a lot that was not remembered. He just remembers certain parts of what he said all these years later. One tactic, especially in Europe, was to transport tanks in thousands of big trucks like semi trailers on the superhighways to have them located where they wanted them when the war was to begin. During, well, let me just say this. With the war that we're seeing in Ukraine right now, which I don't know, it could turn into World War III. The way that it started was Russia had amassed its troops on the border with Ukraine, and it claimed that it was doing military drills. So, yeah, I'm assuming that a lot of units came from other parts of the country to go there, obviously. So that would have required transportation, not just by trucks, but by rail and things like that. I remember as the days were leading up to the war, getting on X, at the time Twitter, and just all these videos of like trucks going to the border with Ukraine. So yeah, there was a big logistical thing going on to get ready for the war. So if this is a true vision, maybe that's what he was seeing. Okay, so anyway, okay. Highways to have them located. Okay. During that explanation, I asked, "What about the atomic cannon?" To which he answered, "I didn't see anything like that." Then he said, "The aftermath was dreadful. Think of the worst, most difficult times of the Depression." He turned to us children and said, "You won't remember the Depression," which was true. I didn't know there was a depression as I was growing up. The sun came up every morning, flowers bloomed, we went to school, and there was church every Sunday. But he repeated to our parents, "Think of the worst condition of the depression. Can you think of something?" To which our father answered, "Oh, yes." Then President Smith continued, "You know how Sunday school picnics are complete with salad, chicken, root beer, and dessert?" Well, in my household, it'd be Coke Zero and Diet Dr. Pepper. And everyone has a wonderful time. That worst time of the Depression will seem like a Sunday school picnic when compared with how conditions will be after that great war. Let me pause right here. Again, I'm leaning more toward this is not an actual prophecy, or if it is, it's misremembered. I've noticed with things like this, there's always this like really dramatic language that's used. That's like, it feels like embellishments, essentially. You know, that, oh, that's going to seem like a picnic. The Great Depression is going to seem like a picnic. And things like that. It goes along with this whole idea of like, oh, we haven't seen anything yet. The tribulations that are still coming. Not to say that they won't, but just like this attitude where it seems like people are wanting to embellish. It's almost like they want to feel special by telling you how bad things are going to go, and you're supposed to look at them and be like, "Oh my gosh, how do you know that?" I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that kind of stuff, but maybe he really did say it. I don't know. As he left, I thought to myself, what he said is really important. I've got to remember it. Okay. To understand President George Albert Smith's woeful statement, I have had a troublesome vision, quote unquote, was one must first comprehend the kind of man President Smith was. Those who knew him best describe him as the most humble, compassionate, magnanimous, kind, and merciful person they knew. He exemplified the pure love of Christ and showed his love for all of God's children by his unqualified service. For example, at World War II's end, he organized a relief program for war-torn Europe's destitute people. The Relief Society sisters made quilts and clothes. The church welfare cannery produced millions of cases of food donated from farms and home gardens. Other materials and food were purchased from donations by church members worldwide. Then he obtained U.S. President Truman's permission to send the aid and assigned Elder Ezra Taft Benson to administer its distribution in Europe. The aid was not restricted to LDS church members. The government of Greece honored President Smith for his and the church's service to its people. Thereafter, the government initiated the Marshall Plan. The organizations like CARE sprang up. Thus, for him to see an event of which he also said in his April 1950 conference concluding speech, quote, "People by the millions will die like flies," end quote, indeed must have been a troublesome vision. So at this point, the letter includes references to these conference reports, which I have pulled up. So the first one is from April 1950 General Conference. And this is him speaking, President George Albert Smith. And this portion of the talk is called Houses in Order. And he says, "Brethren and sisters, let us go to our homes. If our houses are not in order, let us set them in order. Let us renew our determination to honor God and keep his commandments, to love one another, to make our homes the abiding place of peace. Each of us can contribute to that in the homes in which we live. It will not be long until calamities will overtake the human family unless there is speedy repentance. It will not be long before those who are scattered over the face of the earth by millions will die like flies because of what will come." So, okay, millions will die like flies because of what will come, because of calamities that are gonna come, and they have come. There's a lot that's gone on since the time of George Albert Smith in many different ways. Disease, war. There's been lots of wars throughout the world. There's a war going on right now. We've also talked about abortion on the channel and how many have died because of that. So there has been a lot of unnecessary death or death from natural disasters. There's been a lot. For example, in 2010, there was the earthquake in Haiti. It was, if I remember right, it was a 9.0, and it killed over 200,000 people. And then in 2004, after President Oaks gave a talk about the Second Coming in the April 2004 General Conference, later that year, the day after Christmas, there was a huge earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia that killed over 200,000 people. Those are some of the more deadly ones, but there has been a lot of disaster. I'm keeping track of it on my spreadsheets the best that I can. There's been a lot of death from all these different things. So if this prophecy is not true, or if it's not remembered correctly, this is still a true statement as of right now. There already have been lots of calamities. All right, continuing. Our Heavenly Father has told us how it can be avoided, and that is our mission, in part, to go into the world and explain to people how it may be avoided, and that people need not be unhappy as they are everywhere, but that happiness may be in their lives, because when the Spirit of God burns in your soul, you cannot be otherwise than happy. Okay, and then the other reference is simply, I already forgot, but I think this is Harold B. Lee. And this is a later general conference, and essentially he just repeats what was said, like what we just read. Yeah, here you go. Elder Harold B. Lee. Okay, so there's nothing new here, but I pulled it up anyway to check it out. Okay, continuing. When President Smith told us of his vision, the U.S. and the USSR were allies. Some tiffs had occurred between the USSR and the US, but the idea that the Soviets would become an enemy wasn't popular. In 1946, the USA was the world's great military power. It seems the allies of the US succeeded in World War II because we had sent them material. The idea that the USSR would dwarf the US's military might was contrary to any reasonable expectation, but today it is exactly true. The Soviets' military might is awesome. Well, that may have been the case back when it still existed, because it wasn't just Russia, it was all the satellite states, including Ukraine. But that's dissolved at this point. Russia is not what it once was. Nearly all their population, including peasant farmers, serve in their reserves and may become part of their army in time of war. They have amassed a year's supply of food, including U.S. grain, so they will not have to farm the first year of any war. They have about 5 times as many fighter and several times as many modern bomber aircraft as we do. They are well-made, effective aircraft with well-trained pilots and crews. Their infantry's weapons and logistics preparations are staggering. Thus, 2 elements of President Smith's vision are exactly correct. The USSR became our enemy, and their military might dwarfs our own. Well, back in the 80s, sure. It's no secret we have nuclear warhead missiles in Europe and in underground silos here, but in 1946, nuclear missiles were beyond imagination. Even Massachusetts Institute of Technology's president in 1950 said, quote, "Intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads are impossible." It just, I guess we'd have to see the full context of that statement. Maybe, because you have to look at the full context. But if that's really just exactly what he said and really believe that, you guys, scientists, engineers, academics, they do great work, but sometimes I feel like they get a little arrogant when they declare what is or isn't possible, or that they know everything there is to know about a certain thing. I love science. I'm all about science, but it's not complete. It's not complete. And people have such a hard time picturing, like, they think that they're so certain about something, but they have a hard time imagining that, oh, there may be some other way that this could be true. Sorry, I'm not good at articulating myself, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. Let's just continue. But we had them by 1963. I've worked in Minuteman missile silos, which acutely fit President Smith's description. But our cruise missiles were made after 1980. General Bernard Rogers, NATO commander, was so outspoken against the INF Treaty that he was removed. General John Gavins, his successor, said that he could not maintain Europe in a war for more than 2 weeks without nuclear weapons. So 5 more elements of President Smith's vision are verified. We have missiles in Europe and in silos that carry atomic bombs and are essential for U.S. defense. Next, President Smith said that we would withdraw our missiles from Europe to appease the Soviets. Former UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick said that the INF Treaty hurts us militarily, but we have to do it. Dr. Eugene Callan says the treaty was politically motivated. Missiles were used as bargaining chips in negotiations with the Soviets, which is a form of appeasement, and President Reagan may have been buying time with their removal until other new systems were in place. During the negotiations, we revealed we knew the USSR plans to violate the treaty. Thus, 2 more elements of President Smith's vision are verified. On the 1st of September 1988, the U.S. began removing missiles to comply with the treaty designed to appease the Soviets. By the 31st of December 1989, our missiles should be disarmed. Just before President Smith visited us, the newspaper headlined a giant, about 24-wheel artillery piece named Atomic Cannon. It was to have been like Big Bertha, Germany, used to batter Liège, Namur, and Paris. The atomic cannon was designed to fire atomic bombs 100 miles to assure no potential aggressor would start another war. But President Smith said he did not see anything like that. History reveals the atomic cannon was a flop, and by 1948, the program was canceled. The U.S. has a howitzer able to fire a nuclear weapon about 20 miles, but it is very different from the Colossus known in the news. Thus, another element of President Smith's prophecy is verified. As predicted, all U.S. presidents have had Northern European or British ancestry, but in 1988, a man of Greek descent led the polls for a time. He may run again. Thus, one more element of President Smith's vision is realized. we see how another element could occur. Well, it hasn't been realized. It would be realized if he did get elected as U.S. president, unless you're referring to U.S. presidents being of Northern European or British ancestry. That's probably what he's saying, because then he says another element could occur. Okay, whatever. The next element is President Smith's prophecy about another great and terrible war. It would make World War II look like a training exercise, and people would die like flies. This obviously hasn't happened, but consider some of the Soviets' weapons and military preparations and the results of their use. The Soviets have 100 megaton hydrogen bombs, which can be used against military bases and cities. Also, when the Soviets tested one of their first 100 megaton bombs, the electromagnetic pulse, EMP, which is an incredibly high energy radio wave produced by the detonation, melted an electrical system, power transformers, windings 190 miles away. Oh my gosh. Okay, now this is just getting... Okay, the Soviets are far ahead of U.S. in space technology in the number of satellites in orbit. From January through September 1987, the Soviets fired more than 700 vehicles into space, mostly military. The U.S. space program for the same time has... Okay, I'm not going to... Let's just... If the war President Smith saw occurs, conditions will be like our pre-1800 ancestors knew, with some shelters for a few modern machines by which we work. Conditions will be worse for a long time. Government and major services, including police, electricity, potable water and waste, fuel and commercial food, medicines and clothes may not exist. Engines to power pumps, vehicles and machines may not work. 3 Nephi 21:14 through 15 says that if the Gentiles don't repent, the Lord will destroy their chariots, cities, and strongholds. Our ancestors had wagons and horses for transportation and work. Shovels, hoes, seed, and bikes with puncture-resistant tubes may be scarce. There may be no food for farms other than what will be carried. No manufactured goods of it. Okay. At this point, I'm just going to end right here. There's some more, but I feel like this is not right. Not that it couldn't happen, but I think that this is like overly dramatic, embellished, possibly fabricated. I don't know this person. I don't know if any of you are related to them. You can vouch for them. I don't know. But this is an adult recalling what he heard when he was 11 years old. The Soviet Union is no longer around. I haven't found anybody that substantiates this, right? So this is coming not even from a general authority. It's just coming from a random person, someone who claims to be distantly related to George Albert Smith. I don't know. If it is a fabrication, you could see how, this could cause a stir, because like he's talking about all these like recent developments. Like, look what just happened recently. This is a confirmation of the prophecy that I just told you I remembered. See how it's all happening. And, sometimes people fabricate things because they want to feel special or they want the attention. And I'm not saying that for sure about this person, David Hughes Horne. I don't know him, but there's just a lot that doesn't really seem to right about this. There's a lot of red flags. No pun intended, as we're talking about the Soviet Union. There's a lot of red flags. So for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on my spreadsheet for false prophecies and visions. Although I've added a new column B. I don't know what I'm going to call it. Maybe like, I'm not sure what I'm going to call it, but we have these first two visions that are just false. The church said in the ensign that the yellow dog prophecy, like relating to the future of Missouri, is false. It had to do with the Civil War in Jackson County, and the destruction that took place there as a result of the Civil War. It's false when we're talking about the future. And then this supposed vision by John Taylor or Joseph F. Smith about the destruction of America is false, because Joseph F. Smith and Joseph Fielding Smith both said that it was false. And then you have this one that we just read, George Albert Smith's vision of World War III. I'm going to put it down as unverified. Just because it's in the church, just because it's in BYU's library doesn't mean that it's true. You know, they collect historic documents and things like that, so they're holding on to it. It doesn't mean that it's true, and I haven't seen anybody else that's backed this up. So if you know more, especially if there's been like some general authority that said, hey, do you remember that prophecy by George Albert Smith about the Soviet Union? Then feel free to send that my way. But I think that's going to be my conclusion for this one. So I am not worried about this. All right, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. Like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.